Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Matters Ago. Today, I wanted to talk about mental strength, partly because it seems today there's a lot of issues with mental health at the moment. There's kids going through anxiety, a lot of depression, suicides, and all sorts of other things going on in our society. And I'm kind of asking why with this video, because I've met a lot of people in my life who have gone through absolutely horrific things, like pretty much get a list of horrific things and these people can check every single one of them off. Like my grandmother, for example, who was born in Poland in the 1920s and was swept up by the whole Nazi thing and was put through many camps where she saw the worst of human nature, the genocide being the one we all know about, but also things like the abuse and rapes and all sorts of horrendous things she saw in those camps, which she was able years later to still be able to talk about. And we could discuss it and go into the psychology of it and all that sort of stuff, and it didn't make her break down and completely just shut down and die. Whereas apparently nowadays, certain words, not experiences, not long discussions, but just the words can cripple someone, and these would be words that we call triggering. Like, for example, this whole P. Diddy case going on at the moment, I've noticed that a lot of the time, instead of saying sexual abuse, which is what P. Diddy did, and yes, it is a harsh term, but we're talking about something very serious, instead they have to say SA, because it might trigger someone and completely cripple them. And then there's like all these other examples of words that you can't say. You can't even say killed or killing or stuff like that in videos. You have to say unalived or just completely redact it because it could trigger someone apparently. And it just got me thinking because I got people in my life like my grandmother and a lot of immigrants who have come here that I've been friends with over the years. People who come from places like Sudan where they've seen their whole family be murdered or even their whole village and can still come here and get through day-to-day life with a smile on their face, working hard. And the common thing they all say is, yes, I went through those horrible experiences, but they don't define my life. That was a small section of my life that was really horrible, and they've even gone as far to say that you learn lessons from it about people. But instead, nowadays, we've got people going through things that are traumatic and they're just completely crippled by it. And I'm not blaming the people and saying they're wrong and something's wrong with them. There's something wrong with our society. Something has changed along the way, and a lot of things have changed, and some of them have been absolutely fantastic and a step in the right direction. But there's a neglect somewhere along the line here where many generations before, these people could talk about their past experiences in great detail, and we could even learn from it and get all sorts of lessons about human psychology and history and whatnot through it, to the point where people can't even have certain words mentioned around them without it completely destroying them mentally. And I feel like it might come down to things like maybe nowadays, because of like the lack of communication and stuff, because of technology and all the other flashy distractions we have these days, people aren't actually fully working through these problems, and it's the damage is just staying in their head and over time getting worse, and to the point where a simple word can trigger them and really fuck them up mentally. We're not supporting each other enough. We're not talking through things. We're not being rational enough. That's a big one. And that can pretty much sum up like a big majority of all the problems that are happening in the modern day, is that rationality is just not there as much anymore, and we're much easier lied to nowadays. The media doesn't even really try to hide their lies anymore because they don't really have to. It seems from my experience that the vast majority of people will just eat up lies no matter how ridiculous or unfounded in reality they are. And then what ends up happening is you end up having like a conspiracy side of things and another side of things, and it just gets overly complicated to the point where you can't find the truth anymore because it's under like 900 different layers of stuff. So it is partially that we're getting manipulated by the media, technology is distracting us, we've become a much more consumerist society in the West especially, where pretty much our whole lives are dictated around our consumerism. Even like the typical life goals are somewhat driven by consumerism and whatnot. So we're not living in a time where it's, the family unit or the friends and family or even just the support group. It's very individual, like the way we're living nowadays. Everyone's kind of on their own in a sense. We may have help and whatnot, but it's not as, I guess, diverse and intense, for lack of a better word, as it may have been in the past, and that's probably why we're seeing people be so overtly sensitive to so many things, and even simple words can completely cripple them. And people are more anxious and like unsure of things, which would come down to the media manipulation. We can't even really find out what's going on in politics without like getting a law degree and sitting around all day watching the news and making sure that we pick up on every subtle little cue and clue that might give us more of the truth. So that could, I guess, potentially be a part of it. But I think it also comes down to like this softening of language. We're not helping people through their problems. Instead, we're trying to mask their problems and push them down and suppress them, which has never worked. If you look throughout the history of psychology, suppressing and avoiding is not a good method at fixing mental issues. If you're going through some mental issues, suppression is not the way to go about it. It's one of those things you just got to hit it head on. I've had it in my life. Like if you look at my videos, my older videos on this channel, like I don't know if this comes through clearly, but especially the earlier episodes, I was severely depressed. Maybe that didn't come across and it's only like really obvious to me, but anyway, since I've worked through those issues, and obviously along with aging and experience and time, I've grown quite a bit, and I've learned to deal with my issues to the point where I don't get so anxious and depressed and worried about things. I try to be more rational and think through my problems, and if need be, seek out help and all sorts of other stuff like that. So it could even be like a mixture of like the breakdown of like support groups for a lot of people, technology being a distraction, and rationale not completely pushed to the side, but with a lot of things it's pushed to the side. We're like, especially with children, we're like overly protective to the point we're not actually preparing them for life. Like, you gotta sort of let people live their life and have certain experiences so they know how to deal with more serious circumstances that may arise later in life, or just how to deal with life in general, because the harsh reality of life is one, the good one. I'll start with a positive. Pardon me, we're alive. Amazing. We're living the life experience and we're going through it, and it's fantastic. Unfortunately, bad things do happen. Horrible things happen. Absolute atrocities. Really sickening shit happens in life, and to put it bluntly, you're going to have to learn to deal with it. Sometimes life is going to be horrible. Now, for some, it's going to be worse, and for others, it'll be a little bit easier. But we don't compare these sort of things when it comes to the mental scheme of things. That's another issue. You can't really compare trauma at all because we're all different. We all have different psychology, and trauma affects everyone differently. So this idea that like, oh, you don't understand trigger words because you haven't gone through as horrific things as the next guy. We've all gone through horrible mental struggles in our minds. Some people have seen worse things, and it seems, from my experience, especially talking to the various like people from Sudan and Africa and war-torn countries like Iraq and whatnot who have spoken to me about their experience of living in a war zone, those horrific experiences strengthened them and made them more grateful for life in the process. That was their takeaway from seeing murders and rapes and genocides and bodies and all sorts of shit that you don't see on the regular as a regular part of their life for a long period. It's made them more grateful that they're still alive and they get to go on and potentially make better experiences for themselves. Yet other people like are defined by their trauma. And I think that's really dangerous. You should be aware of your trauma. You should be able to talk about it, but you shouldn't be scared of your trauma. You should be comforted and helped on how to deal with said trauma in your life and how to move forward from it, and rationale, be rational about things. Bad things happen, that's a part of life. It's also not your fault, and that's something that I think, even though it should be common sense, people forget that your trauma is not your fault. These things happen to you. These were experiences that happened to you. Don't let it define you, because then that's just irrational to let things that were done to you define you and change your outcome for the rest of your life, and potentially make you miss out on many amazing experiences that hopefully would even outweigh the traumas in your life. I don't know, that's just my thoughts on this whole like mental strength thing, because it's just sad to see as time goes by, each generation from what I've seen, and maybe this is just my interpretation of my experiences, seems to be less mentally stable than the generation before because of a lack of mental strength. Like, for instance, like I mentioned, my grandmother living through World War II and being transferred around many different prisoner of war camps and seeing all the worst parts of human society. Like, she was able to build off that, whereas now that cripples people and that finishes them off. I don't know. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. Thanks again for watching. See you next time for a bit more goat shit.